Regulating Airbnb will be a central issue for discussion at today's Emergency Housing Summit in Hobart. There's a critical shortage of rental housing in the state and participants are hunting for answers. State political reporter Richard Baines has more from Hobart.
It's very difficult indeed, and to put it in perspective, Hobart's rental occupancy rate is a staggering 0.3%, and that's the lowest out of any capital city. Now, there's a few reasons for that. Hobart's enjoying somewhat of an economic renaissance, and house prices, while they're on the rise, are still low comparative to your Sydney and your Melbourne. Speaking from experience, it's a very nice place to live, and the government has also set an ambitious population target, and all that has resulted in people moving here, but there not being the critical number of houses to deal with that population growth. And the flow-on effect has been that we've seen people living in tents at the showground. Wow. And people spending months and months couch surfing as they try to find a rental property. And we're being told now that it's not just lower income, it's also middle income families now that are really starting to feel the pinch. And I think the level of this crisis has been recognised by the fact the government has convened this urgent housing summit. So we had a briefing from the government this morning, and the real key here seems to be their plan to introduce legislation that would in effect fast track approval and planning processes for new builds. And the government said this was something that was used after the GFC to great effect, and we've heard that Hobart needs thousands more houses if it's to deal with this crisis. And we're also expecting the government to release an audit of Crown land, which will show how much space there is. But of course, that's actually going to require building, and we need a short-term fix. So the government, there were sort of questions as to whether or not they would really try to tackle Airbnb, which is part of the reason for the housing crisis. And the government, I don't think will go directly after Airbnb. They're instead going to try to incentivise homeowners to provide long-term rental options. And I don't think that's particularly surprising, because last year our planning minister said that the model that Tasmania would use for Airbnb would be the model that the rest of the world would look at. So it would be pretty extraordinary for them to turn around and backtrack on that. So they're looking now at putting an advertising campaign out there that tells people where they stand in relation to long-term rentals, which is really what the immediate fix would be. They're looking at tax breaks, essentially land tax breaks, and part of the, I suppose, point that was being pressed by the government today was that they think this was something they announced during the election campaign, but they don't think people have really cottoned on as yet. And it's a little surprise. There were, dozens and dozens of announcements. So they're now talking about an advertising campaign, presumably across, your traditional mediums, saying to people, hey, if you own a home, you can save this much money if you put on a 6 or a 12-month rental as opposed to a 3-month. All the key stakeholders, the big end of town, the small end of town, are meeting behind closed doors in the government's executive building now. Look, from the people I've spoken to, they don't think everybody will get everything they want, but the hope is to find some common ground and to find a way forward, because we're left in a situation where in 2018 in a capital city in one of the richest countries in the world, we've got people living in tents. So whatever the outcome, it needs to be immediate.